Hello, this is Dan Nowman Niswander, and you are watching The Nowman Show. And I am here with Alan Minsky, who is the Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America. Alan, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I'm in an attic.
You're in an attic?
Yeah. Expanded out to every nook and cranny of this house here. So I'm up in an attic. And yeah, it's been very warm in Los Angeles. And it's a little warm in this room. But other than that, I'm doing okay. Obviously, it's just a impossibly unique and impossible situation we're all living through. So.
Yeah, and I talk to people a lot and I ask them, how they're doing, and people ask me how I'm doing, and I've noticed already the good of. It seems like people are kinder and more caring than I've noticed. You know what I mean? Because we're all in the same boat together. And that's
I think yeah. I mean, we in Los Angeles, of course, we're driving less, and that's always a great thing. Traffic is a source of incredible anxiety. I agree with what you're saying, and I do think there's some promise for the prospects of a broader solidarity coming out of this experience. It is a pretty overlapping experience, even as we're isolated for most people. What PDA is doing, as you know, we're involved in a new initiative to try to win as many progressive delegates as possible to the DNC. I welcome my friend Jimmy and everybody else who wants to be critical of it to be critical, but we're going to be advocates for it because we think it's what needs to be done just to do what we can do to do the best by our society from the positions of responsibility that we have as, major players inside national progressive organizations. So we're very proud to be partnering with the organizations we're partnering with. And, we're gonna be pursuing this to win delegates. We don't know how the Biden controversies will shake out. If they do somehow create a dynamic whereby he can't remain as the nominee, then hell yeah, we're gonna be asking Bernie Sanders to unsuspend. So that's not out of our hearts yet.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you about that because technically, my first impression of the word suspend doesn't mean that I'm dropping out.
Right.
I'm suspending, so I can unsuspend it, like you would an account, a business account. You can unsuspend it. And I noticed that you did a couple town halls. The PDA did a couple town halls, and I couldn't get into them either from timing reasons or nobody responded to an email. But
sorry about that. We would. So keep trying. Okay. Let me know if you don't. I'll get you in. Yeah.
Thanks. And one of them was the other day was with People for Bernie and Roots Action.
Mm-hmm. That's
and then another one for Healthcare Emergency Town Hall. So you're definitely, besides the electoral politics, you're obviously involved in issues too, and trying to. And my whole thinking when I saw those town halls is exactly what I've been thinking about myself, because another associate of mine that I worked together on when we had a Democracy at Work chapter here in he and I was working on a letter to present to different groups, and I know people, obviously, Green Party and DSA, LA, and also, the Socialist Alternative, PSL, and groups like that, put it out there to them, and, the Feel the Burn Democratic Club or whoever, right, PDA, and put that, get the feedback for people based on making demands, like if Biden is going to be, in fact, the presumptive nominee or the nominee, that there are certain platform issues that we demand. And if you want our support, our vote, you must include those, and they must be not only included in the platform, but your administration must be actively involved with us as coalitions to actually, implement these policies, like Medicare for All, or like a Green New Deal, things like this that we've been advocating for. So the letter is kind of that gist, but it's pliable, for the groups to kind of give their feedback and then to present it to those campaigns, and until we get a response that says yay or nay, and then we can go from there. Because in other words, doing the things that we can do to get a response because I know the reason why we had a New Deal was because there was that kind of pressure put on the White House. It wasn't because it wasn't, Democrats and Republicans sitting around like, well, should we help the people or not? No, it wasn't anything like that at all. I learned from Richard Wolff that, there were clearly the same kinds of similar circumstances then as there are now, where there were conservative Democrats that had no interest in that whatsoever. So it did require some outside pressure, just like, building a movement from the bottom up. It did require that in order for us to get the New Deal. I mean, it didn't happen because the establishment just suddenly felt compassion in their hearts. And that's not going to happen this time either. So, there really has to be, the kind of thing that Bernie Sanders talked about, a political revolution using issues and people to, put pressure on the establishment to say, look, if you want our support, you're going to have to do this. This is not a maybe, and that kind of pressure, and I know that scares some people, but I'm
going to actually even surpass your cynicism here. Your cynicism is well founded, in other words. I don't know what we can do to force a Joe Biden to actually, once he's elected, pursue policies. There are certain laws that govern how the U.S. government functions, and he is who he is. And if he's elected, he's going to pursue what he's going to pursue. And I don't know, he could shout to the high heavens, "I will never allow Larry Summers near me when I'm going to be president of the United States." And
exactly.
And on the day after the election, there will be Larry Summers.
Exactly.
And he, Larry Summers, as far as I can tell, doesn't give a damn.
Yeah, I know.
People like
I learned that from
me having any kind of voice, right?
I learned that from Robert Scheer.
Yeah, and so what we can do, though, is demand that they say what that you want to have them say, and even if we know they're not being sincere, to make sure that they said it, and then we eviscerate them next time they're on a ballot, because that's what the people want, which is Medicare for all. I do think in terms of some of the issues they're talking about, and certainly the great democracy at work strategy of having worker-owned businesses is a great, brilliant strategy for the current moment, in terms of the necessity of so many small businesses are going to go under right now.
That's right.
And so the opportunity to set those up would be fantastic. It's a great strategy and a very applicable strategy. But I do think the big ticket issues that, because of their prominence in the is where you're going to be able to build. There are only a few of them that you're probably going to be able to build an adequate mass movement behind to create the pressure. And probably the biggest ticket item is Medicare for all. He can pick at parts of the Green New Deal, but we also know he's not going to really go there. He can call it whatever he wants to call it, but it's not going to be anything like the Ocasio-Cortez-Sanders proposal. And so
it's not even as good as the original Green New Deal of 2007, which was a much more aggressive platform for 10 years, whereas, in carbon emissions and the Economic Bill of Rights, it's pretty much exactly the same as Bernie and AOC's. But as far as the vast majority of it, which involves massive infrastructure changes that we need, but I guess now it could be pliable after what we're seeing, and we will see, I think, ongoing, to your point earlier, that we're just in the first phase of this crisis. I mean, from the pandemic standpoint, as well as and maybe even more so the economic standpoint, because a lot of people are working from home now, and I just saw today, as you mentioned, that those unemployment numbers just keep going up day by day. It's like, and there's even, I saw a statistic today, 35% of households they can determine now with kids don't have enough food already. And that's I just like, that's, and I think, as media people too, as well as activists, I think we have a responsibility to talk about stuff like that with people, and to make media about it, and to promote each other's work, and things that we stand for, the issues that, are important for people to think about, because they're ready. People are there's
Right,
a lot of people hurting. They're
but
raping.
one of the things you're talking about, though, is, of course, when we get to that, when we have people who are hungry and we have people who are social distancing, then we really are looking at a catastrophe that's very hard for people to intervene in. And so we have to figure, we really do need to figure out how to organize effectively in this context with that kind of thing on the horizon. Because I know that I talked about the supply chain breaking. And the thing, obviously, I mean, people, I've been a leftist my whole adult life. And, I have friends who are Leninists and Maoists and so on. And eventually with some Maoists, I'm just like, the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, what percentage of the population of those countries at that point were directly involved in garnering the food that they ate? Mm-hmm. It was pretty damn high. That's not the case now. Yeah. And if that industrial agricultural apparatus is owned privately, which it is, how exactly are the forces against the private corporate ownership going to be able to provide food if we're going to rebel openly in a revolutionary way against it? Isn't that just a formula for mass starvation? Mm-hmm. So we don't really have a lot of capacity, any of us, anybody listening to this, and this is very frightening, to get involved in growing enough food for ourselves to be able to sustain ourselves, not where so much of the population lives in urban and suburban environments, and so few are in any way related to lives that are involved in agricultural production. And so, those chains breaking could produce just an unmitigated catastrophe. Now, we haven't gotten there yet, but, people should pay attention when we hear about, meatpacking plants needing to close. We need to be attentive to the welfare of the agricultural employees. They are truly essential laborers, as are the people who bring that food into the population centers and fulfill that supply chain. And of course, if my politics were in effect, it'd be those guys that would be getting the salaries that not only the Chuck Schumers and Nancy Pelosi's are getting, but the damn lobbyists are getting.
Exactly.
And these people are real heroes. And I hope again that we can maintain. And I fear that we won't, knowing what I know about American culture, unless there's a real break with the way our culture has gone throughout our lifetime span, where people will lose sight of the appreciation that these workers deserve for what they're doing right now on behalf of all of us. So, there are catastrophes that are mounting across society right now. And, we have to certainly being involved with the level of political influence that PDA has nationally. We have a particular assignment that we're continuing on to try to advocate for the kind of not just liberatory, but pro-worker policies that America really needs. And then, we have to somehow be vigilant and keep track of as much of it as we can. And the statistic you just cited is really frightening, and it's something that people should be more aware of. And you're right, we need to make sure through our networks of independent journalists that kind of information gets out if the mainstream press is not highlighting it. And that's because, look, the people who work for the mainstream press, to do just a really reductive sort of Marxist class analysis of things, they don't have a lot of contact with poor people and the lives of poor people and how they're going to get that information disseminated. They also know the people that are consuming their product are probably not, well, even if they are drawn from the working classes, which they may be, that's not the class of people that the advertisers are seeking to reach to generate revenue, which they need for their businesses. So, the marginalization of the poor and hungry now is very real, and it's going to take independent journalists to really get people to understand what's going on.
And to be able to disseminate information too, because I learned I can't reveal all my sources. We could do that off the air, but like for instance in Houston, Texas, right now, someone was telling me that there's I think it's a school or a church in their neighborhood will have 7,000 people in line for food, and those kinds of things are happening all over the city, she said, and that's in the one in my neighborhood, 7,000 people. And to me, it's just frightening, and this is just unacceptable. And I think we have an obligation to each other to put an end to this kind of insanity, because that's what it is. We need to point out the failures of the system instead of building it up like these people are such great heroes who aren't. And like you were saying, focus on the people who really are, the nurses and the doctors and the people that work in the grocery stores and the people that work for the agricultural farms, and particularly the family farms, because those are the ones that are really doing the best work, in my view. Always have been. I grew up around people like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I should say that people are watching me through natural light, and we are definitely into the gloaming here in Southern California, which is why I've gone from like a lighting where you can see the back wall to a Rembrandt lighting where it's very dark behind me, and I'm not as pretty as a Rembrandt, but I do think I probably got to wind this down. It's tremendous talking to you. I should let people know that, again, I think PDA is involved in very, very important organizing. We are committed to progressive policies and politics first. We use the Democratic Party as an instrument to achieve those, but that's what we're committed to. We want to see a much more equitable society. We want to see, we are an anti-racist organization, we're an anti-sexist organization, and we, we support the postal workers, we support the nurses and the doctors. Boy, the postal workers, that's something crazy that they're going to try to kill that institution. That thing is going to...
Well, that's been in progress for a while, the 75% future benefits for employees. That's absolutely nuts. How come no other government entity is required to do that? Obviously, there's something behind that. And of course, there's always money to be made from mailing packages, so again, it's that whole mindset. This is we know we need to wrap this up, but I know that the mindset, one of the things, I have a button that I got from the first Bernie Sanders campaign from the Field Democratic Club that I wear it a lot. Should have worn it tonight, but it's people over profits. And that kind of message, I think, is really an important one, and conveying to people one-on-one and also groups within groups. And to the point of creating coalitions, I think you and I should work together, and others work together closely so that we can, because I can help bring groups together, and you can help bring groups together, and we really need to start creating some kind of list of demands, something like that. We don't have to even use that word. We could create some other kind of word, initiatives, issues, whatever, proposals, for people to actually start studying if they haven't already, and to think about how do you present this to the powers that be to get them to realize that, you've got to be in touch with the people that you represent. You cannot just represent the 0.01% or people that actually can afford to have stocks, or, you know what I'm saying? That mindset of, a $400,000 and above income, and everybody else just doesn't fit into your paradigm. It's just ridiculous, because the vast majority of people, 99%, make under $400,000 a year, and the average person, probably as a single person, makes probably more like $20,000, $25,000 in this country. So they need to understand the reality that we, as Bernie Sanders said, there's more of us than there are of you. And it would be wise for you to pay attention to that fact. So if we can present it to the general public as the various issues, I think the healthcare is the first and foremost, actually, based on the statistics that you had, plus the fact that people do need income so that they can pay their bills, so that they can actually eat, that kind of thing. So basic necessities, basically. An initial presentation of issues based on basic necessities. I think we can bring all these groups together, starting on the left, to create something in the form of a list of demands, even if it's just a few demands, and then stay in touch and figure out, one step at a time, what we can do. If that means sometimes, maybe once they open up the parks, maybe we can have social distancing meetings.
Well, I think people should take this into consideration too, and this goes exactly to your points, Dan, which is that the it's like I'm fading out. I like it. It's very dramatic. It's almost experimental. And I'll turn to black as we keep going. But look, Bernie Sanders did take third 2 successive presidential campaigns in a row. It's a large country.
Yeah.
He has millions of supporters. And the reality, and I've learned this as the head of PDA, there's just not that many Americans who are directly engaged as citizens with lobbying their elected representatives. And if the Bernie Sanders movement, even just half of it, or a third of it even, were to maintain being active in between the election cycles, not just building the movement and growing it, but also in petitioning their elected representatives and holding them to account, we'd be doing a lot better with what we have now. Maybe not a lot better, a little bit better, but we'd also know where these guys who get away with winning all these elections as non-progressives stand. And in contrast to what people like, we'd also raise the profile, keep the profile of progressive politics high in between elections. So there's that. There are millions upon millions of people who support our positions now. We know that. We were probably more unsure about that as recently as 6 years ago, certainly before the market crash of 07 and 08. And generationally, it looks like we really have support with the wind in the sails of the people, because my understanding is the people who came of age into the voting age population this last cycle from 2016 were even left of the ones who were there before, and that the same, there's only vague statistics, but it seems to be the case with the people who pass through high school years over the next 4 years. So, we have that on our side. And I love the way that this image now looks, but it's been great talking to you. And I suppose it does mean I have to sign off. It's a real pleasure. And I look forward to seeing how this comes out with this visual. So I really appreciate the interview.
Well, thank you, Alan, for coming on and being on the show. And next time, look forward to, a follow-up and keep in touch. And thanks again. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Really appreciate people should check out Progressive Democrats of America at pdamerica.org. Thank you, Dan.
And that's on Facebook too, right? And Twitter and all.
Yeah, but the handles are always PD America, so at PD America on Twitter and on Facebook. And you can find us on Facebook as Progressive Democrats of America. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Alan.
What happened? That's the question. There's a lot to unwrap here. I've learned more in the last 10 years, 2010 to 2020, than I have my entire life. And I'd also have to say that I've seen things in the last 10 years that I never thought that I'd see in my lifetime. And here we are in 2020, and who would have thought by the middle of the year we'd be not only in a pandemic crisis, but global pandemic. Of course, out of that, an economic crisis. Because of it, it's on the level of perhaps the 1930s, potentially, because so many people were forced to go home, be laid off, because of the need to be isolated and because of the contagiousness of the virus, COVID-19. 40 to 50 million people lost their jobs and applied for unemployment just since March. Many people, still millions of people, really hadn't recovered from the economic downturn of 2008. Because then they lost homes, they lost retirement, they lost savings that they never recovered. And now here we are with another crisis on a much larger scale because of the pandemic. Millions of people have been affected by COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands have died so far. So the quarantine was necessary. They're still learning more about the nature of the virus and what potentially could happen in the future as other strains develop. And many societies were just not prepared, not for testing, not for supplies, not for workforces. The first actions towards solving it were stimulus bills involving trillions of dollars that primarily went to billionaires and mega millionaires. There's still people waiting for one $1,200 stimulus check, which they're still probably going to have to pay taxes on eventually anyway. It's crazy. I don't know what other word to say. Now we have social injustice as people have been feeling cooped up in their homes because of the pandemic quarantine. Yet another person of color is literally lynched in the streets. this time Minneapolis by a police officer, like Eric Garner, who was uttering "I can't breathe" in his last words. It caused such an outrage that at least hundreds of protests, peaceful protests for the most part, have happened, not only in Minneapolis, but in cities like Philadelphia, Los Angeles, even in Hollywood. It's reported over 100,000 people gathered to protest and even to celebrate the life of George Floyd. There are so many now that have been literally lynched in the streets that we could create a war memorial type of tribute. Is what has been done to those who lost their lives in military wars. So many problems that have not been addressed for so long, and now here we are, things coming to a head in a very short period of time. So what's next? I haven't even mentioned the environmental crisis, or over 400 parts per million in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're going in the wrong direction there as well. We really shouldn't be driving our cars so much.
We are living in a period of American history that is very strange. It's over, but we are all, even those of us in this room, engaged in a massive process of denial.
I'm working cultural and economic transition because that's where I see the hope.
When he did The Planet is Fine, that was in 1992 on his Jammin' in New York show. And it was very controversial because he wasn't saying don't try to save the planet, but he was saying the only reason you're trying to save the planet is because you're trying to save your life, your convenient life. Like, let's just get real about it.
We have a jobs emergency and we have a climate emergency. We can only fix them together. So we call for the creation of 20 million jobs, like the New Deal, where we created millions of jobs in a matter of months, actually.
What we do in the eco-socialist Green New Deal is say we got to do what we did during World War II, where the federal government either built or took over from companies like GM and Ford 25% of the manufacturing capacity in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy to defeat the fascists. And we need to do nothing less for climate change.
Everything's important. We have to think holistically about those challenges. So the degradation of the planet, it should concern all of us. War and the United States unbearable imperialism, that's a problem. So many different things that we have to work on simultaneously, and I think we're capable of doing that.
I think worker cooperatives are phenomenal, and the more of that sort of structure we have, the better off we'd be. That's one thing I love about the freedom dividend, is that workers having that sort of ownership stake becomes much more realistic.
The best way to describe it, slogan that I use, democratize the enterprise. Finally bring to the enterprise the commitment to democracy we're supposed to be committed to.
The mission of truth is always to allow suffering to speak, suffering from wherever it comes. We are an inclusive group. Yes, we come against the grain, but it's our common humanity